Well, Nigeria faces numerous challenges ranging from global headwinds such as high interest rates, supply chain disruptions, rising energy and food prices, to local challenges such as insecurity, rising debt, and high inflation, low crude oil production, and crude oil theft. Labor issues and flooding, well, that's in recent times. Well, despite increased focus on revenue generation by the current administration, Nigeria has not met with its revenue targets in the recent past. The FG's 2021 fiscal year aggregate revenue underperformed by approximately 25% compared to target. There may also be worries around the assumption around the 2023 estimated bill, as crude oil exports have been below targets due to underproduction and oil theft. Still, the oil output benchmark in 2023 budget has been pegged at 1.69 million barrels per day, 30% higher than average year-to-date crude oil production of 1.3 million barrels per day as of June 2022. Well, let's get talking and understand all of this Monday afternoon. Well, I'm starting the week with a partner and chief economist at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Dr. Andrew Nevin. Dr. Nevin, it's good to see you. Let me still wish you a happy new year.
Hello, it's great to be with you as always, and happy new year. Let's hope 2023 is a good year for Nigeria and for the world.
Well, good. Let's start with making it a good year by more like understanding our spending plan. We have a spending plan of 21.83 trillion naira as approved, presented by the president, and approved a little bit of jerk up there for some supplementary budgeting and all of that. But let me first get your view in its entirety, or what is PwC saying about the 2023 spending plan?
Well, I think you had Taiwo on the show last week, so PwC has a consistent message. I mean, I think the fundamental issues around the economy are not really addressed by this budget. We continue to have the foil subsidy, at least for the first half of the year. We continue to have a significant amount. I keep losing track, and we keep recalculating almost every day or every week because we track the numbers. But I think 70 or 80% of the revenue collected still goes on interest payments. And we haven't done anything to really deal with the fundamental issues around the way money is spent. I mean, I think the reason the tax morale in Nigeria is low, and our findings on this, is that people perceive that when they're taxed, it's not going for good uses. And of course, the Orange report, there's nothing being said about that, nothing being done about that, despite the fact His Excellency President Buhari assented to it very clearly. I think it was April 2020, just at the beginning of COVID. So really, the budget is more of the same. I guess the one difference is that the foil subsidy is scheduled to go only until it's only budgeted about 3.4 trillion naira, I believe, only allocated for the first half of the year. So essentially, the government's saying if the next president wants to come in and continue the foil subsidy, they're going to have to find another 3.4 trillion naira in the budget on there. So more of the same as we come to the end of this administration, not really addressing the fundamental issues facing the economy here in Nigeria.
All right, let's talk about debt servicing now, which many analysts have picked up immediately. The president put pen to paper, saying, how do you think government will fund this budget? That is what many are saying, considering the debt level, saying that we might even hit as much as 70 trillion naira as we move to the middle of the year.
Well, I think it's becoming increasingly difficult. And just quickly back to the foil subsidy for a moment. Of course, when you have this foil subsidy adding an extra 6 or 7 trillion naira a year to the debt, it also drives us interest rates. So then you create this vicious circle where you're borrowing so much, interest rates go up to get that amount of money. I mean, the government would take so much pressure off itself through the elimination of the foil subsidy, because it would not only reduce that part of the deficit they have to fund, but it would reduce the interest rates on all the other parts of the debt that they have. And as we say, when we convert the ways and means, people are talking as though the ways and means from the CBN, that facility, is not debt. It's already debt. So we're already at 77 trillion debt. Now, it's not flashing red because our economy is over 200 trillion naira. So in terms of global debt to GDP, we're still relatively modest. And the Ministry of Finance, Budget and National Plan has made that point. But we are not making any progress here. I mean, what we've said for years is the minister says, the Honorable Minister says it's a revenue problem. We've disagreed with that. We've said it's a growth problem. As long as we continue to grow 1%, 2%, now about 3%, we're going to continue to have this problem. We need growth at 6 to 8% to be able to get the economy big enough to be able to raise enough taxes. And it's very difficult in this situation when people's incomes are not rising. They don't want to pay more taxes, particularly, as I mentioned earlier, when they perceive that the tax money is well spent. And it's compounded by what you were discussing a little bit earlier, which is the reduction in oil production. You would have thought that the number one thing that the government would have focused on was maintaining oil production. I mean, when I came to the country about 2008, I mean, oil production was about 2.2 million barrels a day. Now we're happy when it gets back to 1.2 million barrels a day. And that gap has created real pressure in the system because you have all these efforts at revenue mobilization, even though the economy is doing well. Essentially, we're getting nothing. Not nothing. We're getting a negative impact of oil because not only are we not getting anything from oil, but we continue with the foil subsidy at a high price. So the overall dynamic is very difficult. And I think that we are coming to, in a sense, the end game of it. The foil subsidy is clearly not sustainable at 7 trillion naira a year. In fact, it's more than that because that 7 trillion naira is calculated at the official exchange rate. If you calculate it at what's really happening in the economy, if you calculate it the way it should be with the parallel rate, which is closer to what the market perceives the value of the naira is, the amount that we're spending on foil subsidy is much bigger. So it's clearly coming to an end, as we say. And then in terms of the Orange Shea report and government spending, I mean, there is immense pressure. Will they be able to fund this or not? And if they don't need to fund it, we're going to find ourselves in a very difficult situation. What I don't want to have happen is Nigeria forced to call in the IMF. I mean, we're much better off not taking ourselves to the wall so that we can make changes that we are in our best interest and not make them at the behest of some outside agency. But if we look at our friends over in Ghana, our brothers and sisters there, they've called the IMF in for the 13th time to bail them out of their current financial crisis. Unfortunately, when you have called in the outsiders, particularly the IMF, you've then lost some control of the way the situation evolves. So as we come to the end game of the current structure, economic structure, and make some changes, I sincerely hope that we're able to be in Nigeria, that the next president can keep control of that process.
A lot of work to be done by whoever becomes the CEO. That's what many have been saying, looking at what we have on ground. GDP projected at 3.75%. Inflation at 17.16% with what we have at the moment. This looks like a tall order. I don't know, do you see this achievable? Some say some of the assumptions, you've mentioned some in your earlier submission, but they say look overambitious. I don't know if it comes to you that way.
Well, I mean, 3.7% is certainly better than 2.5%, which we had, or low 2% for many years. I think it's attainable, but we've always been of the view it should be a minimum of 6 to 8%. I mean, I was just spent a significant part of the time in December in India. I mean, they really transformed their economy over the last 24, 25, 30 years, since the early 1990s when they started to make these changes. Again, I'll stress the importance of services as an export. I was in Bangalore, which is really the IT capital of the world. There are 2 million workers in the IT industry in Bangalore earning dollars for India. We've put out that that's a strategy that can work for here. But I mean, right now the situation is just so difficult for us. Someone's going to have to make significant changes as we go forward. But it's doable. I mean, I think one of the things, of course, about Nigerians, and we wrote our book recently on self-organizing Nigeria, self-organizing Niger. I mean, there's such an energy level. There's so many people who want to do things, despite all the problems we face. I see people in manufacturing. I see them in fintech. I see them in IT services, exporting IT services. I see them in Nollywood, cultural industries, trying to do things, and more governors on that. So I don't think it's going to take much to actually turn the ship around, much less than some people think. And I remain pretty optimistic, very optimistic, about the medium-term future for Nigeria. But these fundamental issues, I mean, we've said for some time over the past 6 or 7 years, the real problem is we know the issues, we know underinvestment, the foil subsidy, the issues around electricity, the issues around the exchange rate, the issues around multiple agencies, ease of doing business. We know these issues, but the willingness to take the tough decisions has been lacking. So, for example, we take PEBEC. I mean, Dr. Jaboke is a national heroine. She's done an amazing job at PEBEC, but the government has refused to make any real structural changes. So you've tried to take a difficult or impossible structural situation, overlay this facade of improving ease of doing business, and we really haven't made any headway. So until we're ready to make some difficult decisions, and I think the next president, as you say, has got that full agenda for them, but I think they'll be forced into a situation to make the difficult decisions. as I said a little earlier, I just hope that we maintain the control within Nigeria of how we navigate through that. But I remain optimistic. I think it isn't going to take much to really turn this country around economically.
Let's talk about food now, which everyone always likes to talk about. The Food and Agricultural Organization is coming up with a report and saying that food prices declined for the ninth consecutive month in December, but rose substantially on a yearly basis. How do you understand this report? Does it mean that we're having a reduction somewhere, one way or the other? What could be responsible for that?
Well, I mean, there was a big impact, of course, of the Russian invasion of Ukraine earlier in the year. It had an immediate impact on food prices, February, March, April. And then we had supply chain disruptions that affected manufacturing, but also agriculture, particularly in the Far East. So we've had that, but we seem to absorb that. I mean, the world has an immense capacity to produce food. I mean, the total grain production in the world is about 2.2 billion tons of food, and there's of grains. You have rice, you have wheat, you have barley, and it's done all over the world. So it's not a big surprise that people would respond to these agricultural incentives. In our case, I mean, one of the things that's really heartened me over the last 10 years is that the real emphasis of both the private sector, the public sector, some state governors on agriculture. So we've seen a real transformation. What's holding it back here, sadly, is the security situation. That's the number one challenge facing the food industry. I have no doubt if we're able to get an improved security situation, we're really going to find all this emphasis on agriculture, agro-processing, creating an infrastructure to bring the food to the market is going to work well. I mean, there's everyone knows, everyone listening here today knows the immense productive capacity of it. There was an article this morning, for example, one of the presidential candidates talking about the economic advantages of Niger State. An immense amount of land that's not under cultivation, brought under cultivation, not far from Abuja, a big market on that. So again, it's fixable, but what's been holding back agriculture in particular is the security situation.
Well, staying with food, let's look at supply disruptions. That is what many are talking about. Let's focus on likes of wheat and maybe sugar. How well can we do as a country? We know at the time, CBN was reinvesting in these particular sectors to double production, increase production. But like what many will say, despite all of the efforts in the rice space, a bag of rice is still so much on the high side. So what do you think of all of these initiatives being supervised by the Apex Bank, wheat, rice, and all of this?
Well, I think if you go back just in history, so back in 2013, His Royal Highness Mohammed Sanusi II was asked when he was leaving office, he was asked, should you be doing these intervention programs? Because he began the agricultural intervention back then. And he said, if not us, who? If not now, when? And I think at the time in 2013, that was probably appropriate because when I was here in 2009, 2010, no one was really thinking about agriculture. So His Royal Highness, the CBN really brought it on the agenda. But now there are many players that understand the criticality of it, both in the private sector and the public sector. My own view is that at this time the CBN should retreat from these intervention programs. They're difficult to execute. There's mixed understanding of whether they're effective or not. There's lots of private sector players trying to do amazing things, both on the production side or a company like Afex, which is the commodity exchange. So it's a private company, but it's much further ahead in developing a real functioning commodity exchange and system of warehousing that serves smallholder farmers much further ahead than the public initiative to have a commodity exchange. So I think that the CBN under His Excellency Governor Sanusi, but also under His Excellency Governor Emefiele, has accomplished what was set out, which was to put agriculture on the agenda. I don't think it's any need any longer for them to do the intervention programs. I mean, to the extent that we want intervention programs, I think they would be better housed, for example, the Bank of Agriculture or the Development Bank of Nigeria, which are institutions that are set up for that. So it is time for them to, in my view, withdraw from these types of programs.
When we talk food, everyone is interested because as we move, we're looking at what food inflation will look like moving on. What do you think around that? Then the second question would be OPEC quota. Nigeria is yet to meet that. And we pegged our budget at 1.6, and today we are talking about 1.2, 1.3 in some cases. Are we winning the war against all theft? What more can be done? It seems like the NNPC, being a limited company now, is doing so much around that space.
Well, I think with respect to agriculture, as I said a little earlier, I think that food prices, when inflation of food in Nigeria will not only decline, food prices themselves will start to decline if we address the security issues. But if the security issues, and I'm not an expert, I don't know, I don't have any recommendations around it. It's obviously on everyone's mind. But if the security issues are not solved, then the food issue is not going to be solved. The food inflation issue is not going to be solved. I mean, practically, you can imagine as a farmer, when you're insecure, you're not going far from the village to tend to those fields. You'll end up growing food close to your home that you use for your own subsistence, but not putting in the market. So the only solution to our food issues is security. But the security issue, I think, is if solved, I think there's so many other positives, as I said. On the OPEC quota, I think people have a legitimate right to ask the following question: how is it possible that the most? I mean, I've been the one that said for many years we're not an oil economy. Everyone else has said we're an oil economy. So why would you have a situation where, if you believe you're an oil economy, between the presidency, the Ministry of Petroleum, the NMPC, you allow production to decline from 2.2 million barrels a day back in 2010 to 1 million barrels a day? It's just incredible. It puts so much fiscal pressure, so many of the issues that we're discussing in terms of high interest rates, of inflation, and of the deficit arise because of that lack of revenue. Nothing is coming to the Federation account right now. So I think it's really an issue of that needs to be inquired. What level of mismanagement allowed oil production to drop so fast? On the other hand, the fact that they're able to bring it back, so it was 1.0 million barrels a day in August, so it's now back up to 1.235 as reported. Can they bring it back to 1.6? I don't know, but if they can bring it back that fast, then people should be asking why was it allowed to decline in the first place. That's just put immense pressure on the system in many ways. So I think it would be very, and of course, the numbers, the deficit numbers that we quoted, which are immense, depend on getting to the 1.6. So if we fall short of that, we're going to have an even bigger deficit. As I said, we're really in kind of the end game of what is sustainable economically. Big changes are coming. There's no way around it in 2023.
Before I let you go, the fear of global recession is also the beginning of wisdom. IMF has warned that a third of the economy might get into recession as we move on. Are you worried about that?
Well, I'm worried about it at a global level to the extent I worry about the global economy, but I'm not worried about it at the Nigeria level. We have the ability to control our own economic destiny here. And for years, we've had a good economy globally, and we haven't done very well. And now we have a poor economy globally, and we're going to, I think it's unacceptable to use that as an excuse for the economic management here. There's so many things that Nigeria can do to have a better economic management, to have inclusive growth, to lift people out of poverty, that we shouldn't be looking around at the rest of the world and using that as an excuse for what's going on. I mean, every industry in this country can be developed on that. We put out a number of papers. We put out the paper on debt capital, the real estate industry, for example. We put out the paper on global value chains recently. And that's all in our control. So I really don't have any patience for people that stand up and say, well, the global economy is going into recession, and therefore we're going to go into recession, or we can't develop economically. I mean, one reason the global economy is going into recession is just straight demographics. So the number of adults, working age adults in the world outside of Africa is already declining. The number of children outside of Africa is already declining. So in those kind of demographic headwinds, you can't expect much growth. Like Korea, South Japan, Poland, Spain, Italy, they're not going to grow. Brazil, Thailand are not going to grow very fast because of that. Whereas we have this, what is supposed to be the great demographic dividend, the number of young people is still increasing. So it's perfectly capable for us to grow 6 to 8%, 10% a year, as the governor of the central bank says we should be doing, without worrying about whether the global economy is growing 2%, 3%, or 4%. As I said, I was just in India. The economy continues to do very well, growing 6 to 8%. They don't seem at all concerned about the global economy, and I think we should be in the same position here in Nigeria.
I must thank you so much for your time, Dr. Andrew Nevin, Chief Economist and Partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. Thank you so much for your contributions on Business Nigeria. We appreciate this.
Thank you, Tola. Great to see you. Happy New Year again.
We should the same.